Hi there. Thanks for tuning in. The last time we talked about the income statement, we talked about gross profit or gross income. Now we're going to look at operating expenses and break down the components that make operating expenses, since it is a sum of different things. So without further ado, let's talk about operating expenses. Operating expenses is essentially divided into two subcategories for our purposes. One of them is going to be selling, general, and administrative expenses. Beforehand, we talked about cost of goods sold, which is essentially the cost that a company incurs to produce the goods and services that they sell. However, a company also incurs costs that are not directly related to the production of those goods and services. For example, if I run a company whose job is to mine gold and the product I sell is gold, I still need to employ a human resources team, an accounting team, maybe an information technology department as well, and those people aren't necessarily directly involved with the product itself. However, they're still an essential part of the company. Because of this, their salaries, the offices they work in, and the rent for those offices, the supplies they use, etc., will be listed under sales, general, and administrative expenses as an operating expense. So once again, to stress the point, the difference between operating expenses and cost of goods sold is generally that operating expenses aren't necessarily related to directly producing whatever generates revenue for this company. However, these expenses are called operating expenses because they're what you need to spend in order to run the business operations on your day-to-day. This also very importantly often includes marketing, for example, and this can include any promotions or any advertising campaigns that you have launched. Now that covers selling, general, and administrative expenses. However, there's another very important part of operating expenses, which is research and development. And the title is pretty self-explanatory. It's essentially the research and development of new products, better products, improvements, or new techniques, for example, for manufacturing or doing certain things. These can be a pretty big expense for certain companies that are more focused on that. If you're running a biotechnology company, maybe your research and development expenses are huge if you're trying to develop new technologies, new drugs, for example, or things like that. So depending on the kind of company, your operating expenses may look different. As mentioned before, a pharma or maybe even a technology company may have huge research and development costs. Likewise, certain companies have huge focuses on marketing their products and pushing their things. Some companies in their earlier stages that aren't necessarily focused on being profitable just right now want to push the product out and get it to as many people as possible and then figure out how to make money from all their users later on. That means that maybe they have a huge amount of operating expenses under the selling, general, and administrative expenses because they're spending a lot on marketing campaigns or promotions or advertisements. So depending on the kind of company, these numbers may be vastly different and the distribution of them may be very different. That's pretty much all I wanted to cover for operating expenses for this video. It's a pretty brief one, but we're gonna bring this together in the next video by grabbing our gross profit and our operating expenses and bringing it to operating profit. So I hope to see you then. So thank you so much for watching. And if you want to see the previous video and the next video in this series, they will both be linked in the description. With that said, have an excellent rest of your day.